Behind the Red Line, Episode 18, Bobby Joe Long, The Tampa Shadow, Tampa, Florida, 1984. The kind of city that sparkles at night. Neon lights over strip clubs and dive bars. Music leaking from open doors. The smell of ocean salt and spilled beer. Taxi cabs crawling past street corners. Dancers, waitresses, and night workers making their money one customer at a time. But underneath the glow, there was something else. Fear. Women were disappearing. Dancers who never came home from work. Sex workers who vanished between the club door and the curb. Women last seen getting into a car and then never seen again. At first, it looked random. A missing person here, a body found there. But by the time Tampa realized what was happening, the city had a serial predator hiding in plain sight. A man who blended into the crowds. A man with a quiet voice and a calm face. A man whose car slowed down near bus stops, payphones, and lonely sidewalks. His name was Bobby Joe Long. But at the time, Tampa only knew him as a shadow. This is Behind the Red Line, Episode 18, The Tampa Shadow, Bobby Joe Long. Tonight, we step into a city that didn't sleep because women were afraid to walk alone. Tampa in the early 80s was booming. Tourists filled the beaches and hotels. Spring breakers crowded the bars. Military families moved in and out with base transfers. New housing developments spread inland. On one side of the city, families, suburbs, malls, car dealerships. On the other side, strip clubs, adult theaters, motels rented by the week, and streets where sex work was a way to survive. Women worked the night shift in every sense. Exotic dancers doing 3 shows a night, cocktail servers carrying trays past grabbing hands. Women on corners, in parking lots, in the glow of street lamps, selling time, company, and hope they could make enough to eat. It was the side of Tampa the tourists pretended not to see. And that's where the Tampa Shadow hunted. Bobby Joe Long did not look like a monster. He was compact, unremarkable, soft features, dark mustache, casual clothes, just another guy in Florida in the 80s. He had a history that would later make people say, of course, something was wrong with him. Head injuries from crashes, medical issues that affected his hormones, a childhood full of instability, a growing resentment toward women, but to the world at the time, he was just another working-class man. He held odd jobs, watched TV, dated, went out, drove around. No one knew that under the surface he was studying women, especially those who danced, served, and survived on the city's nightlife economy. Women who, in his mind, were easy to blame, easy to judge, easy to dehumanize. Every night, Tampa's vulnerable women walked the same terrain. The dancers leaving clubs after 2 a.m., walking to their cars under dim security lights, juggling gym bags and tip envelopes. The street workers standing near busy intersections, leaning into car windows to negotiate, hopping in for short rides, quick deals, fast money. The drifters, women staying in cheap motels, sharing rooms, borrowing rides, hitchhiking between bars and clubs. They knew the risks. They knew some men were dangerous. They went out anyway because they had to. For Bobby Joe Long, this was the perfect environment. He didn't need to stalk them for days. He didn't need to break into homes. All he had to do was roll down his window. The disappearances began quietly. A dancer didn't show up for her next shift. Coworkers shrugged. Maybe she moved. Maybe she got a better club. Maybe she went back to her hometown. A woman who worked a certain street corner stopped appearing. Other women said she probably left town, or she got picked up on a warrant. A young woman who'd been couch surfing didn't come back to the apartment. Friends assumed she'd found a new place. In a world where people were always moving, always in flux, always on the verge of leaving or getting locked up, nobody sounded alarms quickly. That's what Long depended on. He targeted women whose lives were already unstable. Women whose absence wouldn't immediately trigger an investigation. Women he knew police would be slow to fight for. Long used his car as his primary weapon. Not a gun, not a knife at first glance. A regular red or dark-colored vehicle. Something that looked ordinary in any Tampa parking lot. He cruised streets where he knew women would be walking alone. He acted like a customer, pulled over, offered money, talked smoothly, made them feel safe, or at least not immediately threatened. Once they got in, the doors closed, the city lights passed by in a blur, and the situation changed. We're not going into explicit detail, but what's important to know is this. Long used isolation, control, and fear. He drove his victims away from the city, to wooded areas, construction sites, quiet back roads. Many of them never came back. Over time, bodies began appearing. A woman dumped near a rural road. Another left in a field. another near an isolated dirt driveway. The scenes were cruel. The pattern was clear. These weren't robberies gone wrong. These weren't accidents. These were deliberate killings. Victims were found in various states of undress. Signs of intense violence, control, and hatred. Each crime scene told the same story. A man picked up a woman in Tampa's nightlife zone, drove her out beyond witnesses, and left her body like trash in the outskirts of the city. Some of the victims were Lana Long, a 20-year-old former beauty queen and dancer; Michelle Sims, a former nurse turned sex worker after hard times; Virginia Johnson, fighting her own battles while trying to survive; and others, daughters, sisters, women with their own histories, their own laughter, their own quiet moments, were added to the list. At least 10 women lost their lives. By late 1984, people could no longer pretend it was random. The media began talking. Is there a serial killer in Tampa? Women's bodies found in similar conditions. Dancers and sex workers targeted. The women working the streets already knew something was wrong. They watched each other more closely. They trusted men even less than before. They shared warnings about certain cars, certain faces. But when the system doesn't value your safety, fear can only do so much. Women still had to work, still had to walk out to the curb, still had to get into cars, because fear doesn't pay rent. Fear doesn't buy food. Fear doesn't heal addiction. And Long kept driving. When he was finally caught and profiled later, psychologists found a web of resentment and distorted thinking. Long carried a deep hostility toward women. He saw them as liars, manipulators, users. He blamed them for his own failures and frustrations. He had sustained head injuries in accidents. He had rare medical issues that altered his body. He felt wronged, humiliated, and out of control. Instead of seeking help, he turned that anger outward. And he chose the easiest targets. The women the world already judged. In his mind, dancers and sex workers weren't real victims. They were people he could hurt without consequence. He was convinced no one would care. For a while, he was right. What stopped him wasn't police brilliance. It wasn't advanced technology. It was a woman who refused to die. Her name was Lisa McVey. On the night of November 3rd, 1984, Lisa, just 17 years old, was riding her bike home from a late shift at a donut shop. Long saw her. He grabbed her, forced her into his car, drove her away from everything familiar, For the next 26 hours, she was held captive. He subjected her to terror and control. But Lisa did something extraordinary. She paid attention. Through her fear, she observed details: the feel of the car seat, the smell inside the vehicle, the sound of the gears, the route he took back toward town, what his face looked like from the angles she was allowed, landmarks glimpsed under a blindfold. She also did something else. She spoke to him like she wanted to live. She humanized herself, talked about family, future, tried to make him see her as a person instead of an object. Finally, for reasons only he fully knew, Long let her go, dumping her near her home. He thought he had maintained control. He had no idea he'd just set in motion the chain of events that would destroy him. When Lisa got free, she did not disappear. She didn't retreat silently. She went straight to the police. At first, they didn't believe her. Her story sounded too extreme, too detailed, too much like a movie. But Lisa doubled down. She recounted every detail she could remember: the make and feel of the car, the way the driver's seat felt older than the passenger side, the shape of the dashboard, the smell of smoke and cologne, the chirping of a specific crosswalk sign she heard when they drove through an intersection, the incline of the driveway when they parked, the way his hands felt when he moved her blindfold, his approximate age, height, voice, mannerisms. Her recall was incredible, and eventually, detectives realized she wasn't exaggerating. She was their best witness, their only living survivor. Lisa McVey became the key to catching the Tampa shadow. Using Lisa's description, the Tampa police narrowed down possible car models, cross-checked vehicles in the area that matched, cross-referenced with known offenders, looked at men with histories of violence, focused on drivers who frequently cruised the areas where victims were taken. They began trailing suspects, watching movements, checking plates. Eventually, they found a car that matched Lisa's description almost perfectly. A brown or maroon Dodge Magnum, owned by Bobby Joe Long. They followed him, watched his patterns, saw him driving the same corridors where women had been disappearing. They had enough. It was time. On November 16th, 1984, officers pulled over Long's car in Tampa. He didn't flee. He didn't fight. He didn't try to talk his way out. He knew. In the car, they found things that connected him to multiple scenes: fibers, hair, items belonging to victims, evidence that he had been leading a second life in the shadows. They took him into custody. The Tampa shadow finally had a face. Long sat in an interrogation room. Small, fluorescent lit, plain. Detectives confronted him with evidence, victim photos, maps, timelines, witness accounts. Details only the killer would know. At first, he minimized. He sidestepped. He played the confused card. But the evidence was too strong. And eventually, he began to talk. He confessed. Matter of fact, flat tone, no tears, no collapse. He described picking women up, driving them away, ending their lives, and leaving them in places he thought would hide his crimes. Detectives listened in horror as he recounted what he had done. The number of victims he admitted to, at least 10. Some believe the real number is higher. Long was charged with multiple counts of murder and other violent felonies. The courtroom became the place where the city finally confronted the fear it had been living with. Families of victims sat only feet away from the man responsible for their grief. Survivors like Lisa watched the justice system do what it should have done long before many of the killings. Take a predator seriously. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic links to several bodies, his own recorded statements, testimony from Lisa and other survivors, physical evidence from his car and home. He was convicted of numerous murders. He received multiple life sentences, plus the death penalty for the killing of 22-year-old Michelle Sims. For once, the system did not let him walk away. One of the most powerful parts of this story is not Long himself, but Lisa, the teenager he thought he could discard. Her courage not only led to his arrest, it prevented other women from being added to his list. Lisa went on to build a life dedicated to protection, not harm. She later became a law enforcement officer using her experience to help others survive and be believed. Her story is a reminder that strength can grow from the darkest places. Not because trauma is ever worth it, but because survivors are often the ones who change systems. If Long is the shadow in this story, Lisa is the light. Bobby Joe Long spent decades on death row in Florida. In 2019, the sentence was carried out. He was executed by lethal injection. He left this world the way he had lived in it. Quiet, controlled, emotionless. He never fully expressed remorse, never gave the kind of closure families longed for. But he could no longer hurt anyone. The Tampa shadow was gone. The tragedy of this case is not just that there was a killer, it's that he targeted women who were already vulnerable. And society, didn't protect them. Many of his victims were sex workers, dancers, women with addiction, women escaping violent homes, women living on the edge of poverty. People often judge them in life and even in death. But this is the truth. They laughed. They loved. They had favorite songs. They were children once. They had dreams, even if those dreams were buried under survival. They were not just Long's victims. They were human, and their stories deserve to be told by more than just headlines and case files. For a time, in 1984, Tampa's nights belonged to fear. Women walked faster, looking over their shoulders, wondering if the next car that slowed down beside them would be their last. Bobby Joe Long wanted to own that fear. He wanted the city's most vulnerable to feel hunted. He wanted control, but in the end, he lost that control to the courage of a teenage girl and a city finally willing to listen. The Tampa shadow is gone, but the women he harmed remain in memory. Their names spoken, their stories shared, their lives honored. The night no longer belongs to him. It belongs to them. This is Behind the Red Line, Episode 18, The Tampa Shadow, Bobby Joe Long.